All right, so now we're back. We're going to talk about skin color pigments. All right, let's see. Kind of move me anywhere that's not going to obstruct something. Right. So melanin, again, is produced in the epidermis by melanocytes. And so if you look down here, here's this melanocyte, and as I was sort of drawing for you guys in an earlier video, it has these projections, and you can kind of see it cradling these different keratinocytes. And then you can sort of see that these, I don't know, these darker little shapes, that's where the melanin is. And melanin isn't just kind of randomly thrown in there. It's actually in these little sort of vesicles. They're called melanosomes. Okay? So sort of like if you remember way like back to earlier video when we talked about like lysosomes, perioxysomes, those kinds of organelles in the cell. This will also be an organelle and it contains melanin. Basically what these melanocytes are doing is they're converting something called tyrosine to melanin. Okay? So basically taking this amino acid, tyrosine, and they're converting it to melanin. And it's going to be the UV and sunlight that's going to stimulate these melanocytes to increase melanin production. Now, some people do not have the ability to increase melanin production. Okay? Some people never tan, they never get any darker, they simply burn. Those of us who can tan, it's very clear that melanin production increases, right? You go in the sun, you tan, well, that's because you're producing more melanin. One of the things that I really want you to take note of in this image is if you look here, right, so this sort of skin is being split into three different groupings. So they have Africans and darkly pigmented individuals, Asians, and then Europeans. So your Caucasian Europeans, right? So in Africans, the darkly pigmented individuals, what you'll notice is that in all of these, the number of actual melanocytes is the same. Here's one big melanocyte. But what's different is that the melanocytes in the darkly pigmented skinned individuals is producing a lot more melanin, a lot. And then less and less as we go toward those very pale Caucasians. Okay? So everyone has basically the same number of melanocytes. However, the amount of melanin that they're actually producing is going to differ. That's about it. The other thing to kind of take note of is because that melanin is going to help protect us from UV. If you look, notice where these melanosomes containing the melanin are lining up. You see that? So these little circles are the cell nucleus. Now, why do you think these melanosomes, and even these little melanin granules, are really lining up right above that nucleus? So just take a second and think about that. What is in the nucleus that we're trying to protect from UV? Well, the only real thing that you have in your nucleus, right, is going to be DNA. And DNA is a blueprint for every single last protein in your body. Okay? So that's what it's basically the map for everything, or the instructions for everything. So, and UV can damage DNA. Right? So what you're going to try to do, what your body tries to do, is as the UV comes in, it's going to hit those melanosomes and the melanin to prevent as much as possible any damaging UVs from affecting the DNA in the nucleus. Kind of nifty, right? That's kind of nifty. So basically the same kind of thing. I'm trying to get rid of my image right now. So again, here's a nicer picture of what a melanocyte actually looks like. Again, it has these real kind of snaky kind of arms. And you can see that it's inserting melanin from the melanosomes into the cells around it. And then you can kind of see in this image here, if those UV rays exceed what you can block by a melanin, you end up damaging the cells, you get sunburn. All right. Some of the things that's kind of neat. So freckles or liver spots as you get older. I don't know why I don't call them like freckles. They're simply the same thing. We give them this horrifying name. Look, I'm old and I got liver spots. Oh, that's terrible. No, I'm not going to have liver spots as I get older. I will simply get freckles. Anyway, what happens is that, like on this little girl here, what happens is that the melanocytes in like little clusters are simply going, I need to produce a lot of melanin. So they produce a lot of melanin. So it's not even, right? So just melanin, like a high level melanin production in a patch. And if you kind of notice, like I don't know if any of you guys were, had freckles when you were growing up. I know I did. It was right in this area. And when you think about that, right? I get that when I was playing out in the sun in the summertime. And when you think about it, where do you burn very easily, right? On the tip of your nose, right? And those cheeks are super easy to burn. When you think of like lifeguards and where they put tons of suntan lotion. So it makes sense that you get like all these freckles here because they're trying to protect you in those particularly exposed areas. Now, in this case of this individual right here, this individual is an albino, so it's lacking this thing called tyrosinase, okay? And basically that ACE will tell you that it's an enzyme, right? And that enzyme is breaking down the thing, whatever thing's in front of it, namely tyrosine. So if you remember just one slide ago, we had said that melanocytes are going to convert tyrosine into melanin. And basically they're going to use this enzyme, tyrosinase, to do that. So if you don't have the enzyme, you can't make melanin. So you can't make melanin, there is no pigment. Okay? So as you can see in this girl, not even in her eyes. Okay? And then this individual here is exhibiting something called vitiligo. And what that is, it's an autoimmune disease. So that basically means that the immune system has attacked and killed melanocytes in certain areas of the skin. So if it's killed the melanocytes in this area, you cannot produce melanin, no pigmentation, so you don't have skin color, like you don't have that darker color in that area. Now it's particularly prominent in this individual because she's naturally darkly pigmented, so it's pretty obvious where she's not. But Caucasian individuals can have the same kind of issues as well. Skin color is really going to be determined by a large number of different factors. So it's not just how much melanin you have, but there are also other pigments in your skin. For example, keratin kind of gives you sort of more of a reddish orangey kind of hue. Hemoglobin, so basically blood in your capillaries and how many capillaries you have closer to the surface of your skin. So for example, women tend to have more capillaries closer to the surface of their skin, so they tend to have a more of a rosy complexion than male counterparts do. And obviously not everyone, but I mean it's just a general kind of thing. So you can kind of see there's many different varieties of skin colors. There isn't just one, right? And it's due to many different factors. Oh, just a little kind of aside. So this keratin, one of the foods you're going to get that from is going to be anything that's orange or red kind of food. So you can kind of turn yourself orange by eating a lot of like carrots, more particularly carrots. Sometimes people go on these really crazy diets, and you'll actually see them starting to turn their skin kind of orangey in hue. It's because they've really picked up a lot of that coloring. Same idea for like birds. Anytime you see a bird that has any kind of red in it, that's all from diet. So if you don't give them that, they won't be red. An interesting factoid for you. Ooh, and a little aside, you can actually make your friends kind of pop in here because this is just sort of like a little story. You can actually make your friend's bird turn red. So and I would recommend doing this because it's kind of a fun joke, I guess. With no harm to the bird. If you basically babysit someone's parakeet, for example, they come in all sorts of different colors, yellow, blue, whatever. If you babysit the bird, they go through molts, so they'll lose their feathers and the new ones come in. So let's say you're babysitting it at that time period. If you happen to give that bird like lots of different like peppers and red things, anything that's red, it'll deposit that pigment in its feathers. So all of a sudden, the individual's blue bird becomes orange or even reddish. So when you come back and like, what happened to my bird? They're like, I gave it carrots. I don't know why I think that's funny. I do. Anyway, but you can do that. It's kind of a fun thing to do. Or even if you have a bird and you're like, I don't want this color anymore. I want a different color. Go for it. You're not harming the bird. You're just having it deposit different colors in its feathers. All right. I'll stop at the bird now. Let's see. All right. And let's try to hide me because you won't see things. Okay. So how did our skin colors evolve? Obviously, in the world, we have people who are very darkly pigmented, lightly pigmented. Some people that can tan real well. Some people that don't tan at all. They simply burn. So how do we get this wide range of skin colors? In this video that I have a link to up here, scientist, her name is Nina Jablonski, great scientist, a great talk. It's about 18 minutes or so. You guys can watch it. She explains all this as well, so if you kind of want to go back and review, you can. There's a link. But basically what's going on here, if you look at this image right here, you can see UV radiation in the skin. There's two main forms of UV radiation that are bombarding us on a daily basis. The first type is UVA, and the second type is UVB. Now, UVA is a bit more of a long wavelength, and then UVB is a bit of a shorter wavelength. Now, UVA is going to be the wavelength that's going to stimulate you to tan. Okay. And UVB, however, is also sort of beneficial in one important way, is it's going to help your skin produce something called vitamin B. Now, I just want to say something, and this is another PSA for you. Tanning salons will often say that they have the healthy form of UV radiation, namely UVA, because it's the one that helps you tan and doesn't cause all sorts of other problems. They are lying to you. There is no such thing as necessarily healthy UV form of radiation that isn't going to cause damage in some way. Okay? In fact, the industry was busted like about 5 years ago now. There was a big convention that they were having, and there were memos being sent back and forth between executives at large like tanning businesses on how can they mislead the population. So there's actually a sort of segment of that conference that was just for how do we mislead the population into believing that tanning salons are safe. So again, they're not safe. So don't believe the hype. They're lying to you. In any case, there's basically two large evolutionary selection pressures in how skin colors have evolved. Okay? So the first thing is that even though UVA helps us tan, and yay, that's nice, what ends up happening is that folate can be damaged by this UVA. So again, if they tell you that this is the healthy kind, they're lying to you. Folate is going to be very important in things like cell division. Now, there are many times in one's life that cell division is going to be super important. Things like in a developing fetus, right? And if you think about it, what do they always tell women to take? Lots of when they're pregnant? Folic acid, right? So folic acid is basically folate. So anyway, this UVA can break that down and damage it, which basically ends up resulting in things like neural tube defects, so things like the spinal cord being formed outside of the body, so paralysis. Sometimes it ends up leading to miscarriages, right? Again, it's interfering with how cells are dividing, and a fetus is nothing else but a bunch of lots of dividing cells, right? Baby's growing. It'll also damage sperm cells, right? Because again, those are dividing cells, and males are producing sperm cells throughout their lives, so it can damage sperm cells. So anyway, so UVA is it can be potentially very harmful, okay? Particularly, the reason why, because it's damaging this folate in both males and in females, okay? So basically, what has happened is to protect us from this UVA. Remember, UVA is what's causing us to tan. Your skin gets darker. The darker the skin gets, the more melanin there is to protect it from this UVA. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, UVA causes you to tan, basically because your skin is trying to protect the folate in it so you don't run into all sorts of complications during pregnancy. So again, if we couldn't reproduce as a species, we would have died out a long time ago. But remember, UVB is helping us make vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is super important. Okay? Vitamin D is sort of the first step in a series of reactions that forms something called calcitriol. So vitamin D, in its active form, is called calcitriol. Okay. And this calcitriol is really important in calcium absorption from our digestive tract. Okay. Calcitriol will increase our ability to absorb calcium in our digestive tract. Okay. Without it, you really won't absorb much at all. You can take as many calcium pills as you want. If you are lacking, if you're deficient in vitamin D, you will not absorb any calcium. Okay. So anyway, why we care about calcium? Well, calcium is important for healthy bones, right? Healthy bone formation. Without that, you may end up with rickets, and I'll show you an image of that in a second. So let's think about this. Human beings, as a species, our species began in Africa, right? Particularly around the equatorial belt. Lots of sun there. So in those situations, the main pressure was we had to protect the folate from UVA. As individuals end up migrating away from that equatorial belt and they went into the European areas, there was less and less sunlight. So with less and less sunlight, it's harder and harder to make vitamin D if you're darkly pigmented. So we start losing a lot of that pigmentation so we can make enough vitamin D, right? So we can absorb calcium, so we can avoid conditions like rickets. And again, I'll show you an image of this. It's very debilitating. Again, we would not have survived as a species if everyone had rickets. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So here's rickets. So without proper calcium deposition, bones are very porous. And when bones are porous, they can't hold up your weight. So they start bowing under the weight of the developing individual. Okay? So you can kind of see here are some individuals with rickets. You can kind of see their legs can't hold up their own weight. Here's a X-ray of an X-ray of a person with rickets. You kind of see how those bones have simply bowed under the weight. Right? Can you fix rickets? Yes, absolutely. Give the person proper amounts of vitamin D and calcium, and kind of help these bones. You can kind of see they inserted some pins in here to help pull the bones back into like the shape that they're supposed to be in, and basically it can heal itself. It takes a long time, but yes, you can, for the most part, fix it. I'm sure there's going to be some problems for the rest of their lives, but for the most part, you can kind of fix this. But you can clearly see how this is not particularly helpful in a species. So again, you need to be darkly pigmented enough in cases when you have high UVA, so you don't damage your folate. But you also have to balance that with being lightly pigmented enough in order to make enough vitamin D. Now, one thing I want to stress that I did not say, melanocytes are simply producing melanin. The keratinocytes are what's producing the vitamin D. So melanocytes do not produce vitamin D. Those are two different things. All right. And sort of when we take a look at this, the different sort of shades of skin really correlate very well with this. So you really have darkly pigmented individuals near that equatorial belt, and as you get closer and closer to the poles, we have less and less sunlight. You'll have more and more lightly pigmented skinned individuals. In some areas, right, where you have lots of UV light for part of the year, and then the other parts of the year you don't, that's where you see people that can tan very well, right? So it kind of goes both ways. You get light enough in the winter where there's very little sun, right? So you can make vitamin D, and then when you have plenty of sun, you start getting a little darker, so you protect the folate. So you go both ways. And then as you go further up, some people can't even tan anymore because basically year round they don't get enough sun to really necessarily worry about burning as they do, they worry more about the vitamin D. Okay. And in some, I mean, let me also mention this. In some places where people do cover up quite a bit, and they don't facilitate vitamin D production, a lot of times what will end up happening is that they'll supplement their diet or their natural diets, so that culturally or ethnically, the ethnic diets usually have foods that have lots of vitamin D. Okay, so for example, Eskimos have food, their food has lots of vitamin D in it. Okay. All right. Please let me know if any of this is confusing. Feel free to email me at any time.